Hey, what up, everybody? Hope you're having a great day. My name is Jay, and you're watching Clouded Reactions. So, Jay, World War II, Sabaton history. Let's just hop right on in.
At least among the Western Allies, it is the most often told story of the Second World War.
And it's also the beginning of the Sabaton sound. Primo, Victoria.
Through the gates of hell, as we make our way to heaven, through the Nazi lines. Primo, Victoria.
June 6, 1944, a few minutes after midnight, a couple of British gliders silently touched down in Normandy near the Caen Canal. Moments later, all hell breaks loose. Shouting, the British commandos race towards the bridge, overwhelming the confused defenders with hand grenades and submachine guns. In minutes, Benouville Bridge, codenamed Pegasus, has been taken. The first phase of Operation Neptune has begun. Neptune, as part of Operation Overlord, was designed to storm the German defenses on the French coast and establish a beachhead to strike further into Normandy. A massive amphibious landing was to be undertaken to open a new front in the war against Nazi Germany and its allies. At 5 different places, the Allied forces would land: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Thing is, the actual landing at the shore was only to take place after a lot of other chess pieces had been moved. It was vital to the success of the operation that paratroopers and commandos would go in first, soften up the German defenses in the rear, and disrupt their communications. Brigadier James Hill had told his men before, "Gentlemen, in spite of your excellent training and orders, do not be daunted if chaos reigns. It undoubtedly will." Far on the western side, the first American paratroops...
Man, can you believe that? He's pretty much saying, guys, you know what? You are trained for this. You got this down to a science. But once you get your boots down on the ground, man, it's gonna be chaos. No matter how well prepared you are for it, you're gonna go through hell. And just don't be, just expect it. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy. That they're going in trained, and yet even then, you gotta expect the unexpected, unfortunately. Whew.
The 82nd and 101st landed. They were to protect the gap between Utah and Omaha beaches, and, like the British further east, would destroy as many of the German coastal batteries and anti-aircraft guns as possible. The Germans were aware that an invasion was coming. The concentration of force around the British Isles was obvious, but they did not know the exact date nor the location. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, in charge of the German defenses at the Atlantic Wall, had made repeated visits to Normandy. Now, if the invasion was to begin here, the Allies would find not one, but several obvious landing zones. So Rommel worked the construction companies to improve the local defenses. He ordered the flooding of fields, the tightening of minefields, and the creation of anti-airborne poles. But whatever he did, it seemed like nothing could ever be enough. The length of the Atlantic Wall was just too large, and the Germans lacked both the resources and the manpower to create a solid wall of fortresses. Now on the night of June 6th, the German soldiers awoke to flak fire and explosions. Local commanders hung on the telephones trying to get any sort of orders or information about what the hell was going on. Was this the invasion? Was it a raid? Was it just another bombing run? Fate had it that Rommel was far away in Germany just then, and at the same time, most of the Wehrmacht High Command was either in Paris or basically anywhere except where the fighting was actually happening. Many lower-ranking commanders lost their heads, sending their local reserves in the hopes of stopping the invasion as it began. And at first, German resistance was decidedly lackluster. Many sites were guarded by men from Eastern Europe, often Poles, Czechs, or from the Soviet Union, who were pressed into service with the Wehrmacht. They had neither the training nor the will to stand up to the aggressive attackers. This allowed the first waves of paratroopers, the Pathfinders, to place radio beacons and Hall of Fame lights to mark the landing zones for the real attack. Soon, over 13,000 Allied paratroopers dropped from their transport planes. In small groups they fought, ambushing the Germans and attacking their barracks and patrols throughout the night. It was absolute chaos. Firefights were reported seemingly everywhere, and German officers had a hard time getting any assessment of the situation. In other words, paratroopers were doing their job. The second phase could begin. At each hour, a huge swarm of American and British bombers made its way to Normandy. Since April, they had intensified their efforts to pound the German positions into non-existence. But Allied High Command was not taking any chances. Once more, they would try to level anything the Germans had put in front of the landing zones, preferably the anti-aircraft casemates and high-caliber naval guns. RAF Bomber Command dispatched Halifax and Lancaster heavy bombers. The U.S. Air Force sent out Flying Fortresses and Liberators at the forefront, Mosquito bombers, Thunderbolts, Marauders, rocket-firing Typhoons. Pretty much anything that had a cool name was to be thrown against the German Atlantic Wall. All in all, over 11,500 Allied aircraft would attack and wreck the German positions on the French coast this morning. The Luftwaffe might as well have not existed at this point, because there was no way of even making a dent into that kind of force. Then the final third phase began, as the guns of the navies opened up. Whatever the bombers had missed now took direct fire from 900 warships of the Royal Navy and 200 warships from the U.S. Atlantic Fleet. Under cover of their shelling, the landing crafts made their way slowly through the strong waves. Over 4,000 boats had been brought along to carry troops, tanks, and war material into the designated landing zones. Even duplex-drive Sherman tanks and waterproof Churchill tanks were to be landed. At around 6 a.m., the first thousands of American, British, and Canadian troops were about to close in on the beaches. The coast in front of them was burning and clad in smoke and morning mist. The Pathfinders had enjoyed the element of surprise. This element was quickly fading. The Germans were now on full alert and began arming and organizing themselves. They set up defense perimeters at the beaches, manning the guns in the bunkers and resistance nets. Nearly all of their large artillery guns had been destroyed in the bombardment, as it turned out. Machine gun nests, smaller bunkers, the control centers for the Goliaths, everything had gone up in flames. What the Germans were left with were little groups of men with small arms and mortars. Now, Hollywood and video games often portray the defenders as a large army of elite Nazi veterans, but in reality, this was the Wehrmacht of 1944. Much of the Normandy defenses were orchestrated by experienced NCOs, sure, but the men under their control were mostly teenagers or men over 40. Many of them could not have served in the army before because of health issues, but the German army had been scraping the bottom of the barrel. However, even a frightened recruit can pull the trigger of an MG-42 machine gun, and the Germans still possessed quite a number of those. With the advantage of the defender, they prepared to rain down 1,400 rounds a minute over the beaches. Utah Beach was, like most other landing zones, a long strip of sand, but intercrossed by dunes that provided a modest amount of cover. As the landing crafts opened their ramps, the men burst out. Immediately, machine gun and small arms fire smashed into their ranks. Despite the heavy damage they'd taken, many of the German casemates were still standing, and the German soldiers fired from their gun slits into the oncoming landing craft. Luckily for the Americans, the Sherman tanks had arrived as well, providing cover as combat engineers raced across the dunes, trying to blast their way through the barbed wire. To the east at Omaha, the Americans were not quite as lucky. There was no trace of the supporting tanks. In fact, 30 of 32 had sunk into the sea. And while most of the German defenses at Utah had been obliterated, quite a number of their resistance nests here were still functional. Mortar shells tore into the landing craft, killing a third of the first company outright. Then at 6:31, the first assault ramps went down.
This kind of war, crossfire, grind to the sand.
the Americans struggled to get out. The German machine guns tore into the packed groups of men, killing dozens in mere seconds. Bodies piled up in the landing crafts, and many panicked, jumping into the water, only to be dragged down by their kit. Still, the soldiers pressed on, out of the boats and onto the beach. The first waves were completely exposed to the German machine guns as the men ran over the sands. For the only option was to make a mad dash towards the end of the beach, despite their instincts telling them to lay down behind the smallest amount of cover. The NCOs spurred their men on as mortar shells screeched past them. All around them, men were shot or blown apart, but more and more American soldiers were arriving. There were simply too many for the overheating MG-42s to take on. Eventually, small groups of men made it to the beach wall, firing back at the Germans, while the engineers blew holes into the barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes. The British forces at Gold and the Canadians landing at Juneau fared better, as tanks and infantry arrived pretty much simultaneously. Facing only light opposition, they quickly pushed onward and beyond the beaches, under the cover of the Churchill tanks, which were armed with bunker-busting mortars or flamethrowers. They systematically cleared enemy strongpoints. Mines and machine guns were still deadly, but not in enough numbers to stop them. At Sword Beach, however, where the British infantry ran into a similar hail of fire from machine guns and mortars as at Omaha, 200 men had been killed or wounded in mere minutes. The men were pinned down on the beach. Single 88mm guns blew the landing craft apart, and bleeding and burning men littered the beach. Several Churchill tanks were even knocked out. But even in all that chaos, the Allies made progress. They literally blew their way through and out of the German defenses. Explosive charges and tanks hammered the bunkers and casemates, and once one German strongpoint was overcome, the others were open for attack. So, like a house of cards, the German defenses fell apart. The men overran the German resistance nests, often not stopping to take any prisoners. They cracked the bunkers with high explosives, then cleared them with grenades and flamethrowers. The surviving Germans were in full retreat. By around 9 a.m., D-Day was looking pretty good for the Allies. So far, the Atlantic Wall seemed to be fully penetrated. The German beach defenses had been overrun and the major strongpoints overcome. From all sections, the troops were pushing onward, trying to keep the Germans from forming new defensive lines. But, although the Wehrmacht had been pushed back, it was not beaten. In fact, new battle groups were formed, and the Panzer divisions and highly mobile Waffen-SS were making their way north. The gates to hell had been pushed open, and if the Allies wanted to free France from the Nazi stranglehold, they would have to make their way straight through the German lines.
Through the gates of hell, as we make our way to heaven, through the Nazi lines.
Okay, those are big words, Joachim. The beginning of the Sabaton sound.
Yes.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, in a way, it is not only that album, but that was the first song where we started incorporating, well, arranging the instruments that way, harmonizing the vocals the way we do, which is sort of like you would do in, I guess, Lutheran church hymns.
But whose idea was it? Was this your idea or a producer's idea or a little bit of both?
In this case, I am to blame.
Yeah.
Actually, I remember we recorded the songs, this was, doing a demo back in 2003, I think, something like that. And I remember the look on everybody's face when I said this song would only have vocals as an intro, and they're like, what?
Oh, no.
Through the gates of hell, we only do have that. And they're like, yeah, and then you have delay and reverb? Like, no. It's like that. That's how the song starts.
Did you say, like a Lutheran choir in 1527? And did you say it with this accent, too, just like that? Just to really complete the picture.
No, I was thinking, I remember clearly when we were in the studio, we recorded the song, and we had done the lead vocals, but we had no harmony vocals. And we had never done anything like this before. We'd always do we call it fotbollskör in Swedish, football choir.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
You get everybody to sing along.
And everybody does it at once,
the same harmony, more or less in rhythm, in key, whatever.
But if you get like 8 guys, it works.
Yeah. Exactly. I remember Per was sitting behind the control desk because we were recording this at night. We were recording with Tommy Tekgren at the time in the Abyss studio. And Per was sitting behind the control desk. Me, Richard, and Oscar, the guitarists at the time, were standing behind the microphone. And I showed them, like, now we're going to sing "To the gates of hell as we make our way to heaven, to the Nazi lines, Primo Victoria." And just like that. And they're like, that's weird. And then, "To the gates of hell as we make our way to heaven, to the Nazi lines, Primo Victoria."
It's the 1/5.
Yeah. And then we did copy for the last one, we copied my lead. And everybody thought, this is weird. You know, and heavy metal song, you're going to destroy this. You know, but nobody. I mean,
Primo Victoria. This is like you guys. This is like your song.
One of our most famous ones, actually. But I was so happy because I remember feeling it myself. I remember seeing Per, because when we sang them all, I told them just to remove all the other harmonies. We only heard what we just sang. And then I told Per, okay, now just crank all harmonies up.
So yeah, they didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know. Cool. And then when the choir first comes after the intro, Primo Victoria, I remember Per sort of like, I don't know if he did like that or he just pushed himself away from the mixing board doing like that. Yeah. And I remember myself for the first time, and this is quite an emotional moment for me actually, this is for me an extremely important moment in Sabaton history and in my life, because this is the first time I thought something was so good that we had done. Okay. That it was so good, it was, what do you call it, not only good to be what we did. It was not only good enough it's good for these guys from Fallen. Oh, yeah. This was really good. And it was actually as good and better than I would have hoped for. So, I mean, Primo Victoria, which should be Prima Victoria, but it's female, we know now, sorry. But it was sort of means the beginning, or the first victory, or the beginning of the victory. And it's also, in a very real way, the beginning of Sabaton. Because I noticed how much I loved writing in that style.
It's interesting that he keeps saying that this is the first Sabaton track that he had a new sound to it and it was good. Kind of hinting that they had songs before this. And I know, I'm pretty sure one of my comments a long time ago said that they had originally started in 99. The Sabaton group started playing music in 99, yet their first album was in 2004. So I'm curious, did they have songs or like solos that weren't on albums that I don't know about that they had made before this album? Because he's saying right now he pretty much, like, this is the first track of the album, this is the first sound of Sabaton where they really started incorporating, like I said, the music, the instruments, and the choir, how they sing, mixing it into a heavy metal band. So I'm glad he had the insight to do that. But I'm curious, are there songs that I should be listening to before this album to really hear the very first sound of Sabaton and how they, you know, what they sounded like, I wonder? Let's play.
Felt like all of a sudden we had our own musical identity. We were not copying other bands. I mean, that thing that was new to us then is now, what do you say, a very, very, very big part of the Sabaton sound that we use today. That way of arranging the choirs, that way of arranging the instruments, having the guitars playing the same sometimes, swapping into octaves, doing different things, a lot of it, the use of synthesizers even.
And now you guys are going to switch to a different kind of history on your next album, right?
Yes, pornographic history.
I mean, but you're not going to do any research on any porno sites because that would involve watching pornography.
That would be wrong. No.
That we don't.
We'll just make shit up as we go along.
See, that's great. See, that's what Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's a new slogan for the Sabaton History Channel. Sabaton History, making shit up as we go along. See you next time.
Ooh.
All right, everyone, you know the drill. You click, click, click.
Primo Victoria.
Not nearly anywhere close to him. So I guess Utah wasn't nearly as bad as Omaha. It's been a long time since I really delved deep into World War II. There's just so many aspects to so many armies, so many generals. Actually surprised that they didn't bring up, I believe this was after the slap heard around the world where American General Patton slapped a soldier because he was in shock, and pretty much Patton, slapped him like, yo, snap out of it. And because of that, they took Patton out of the war, and they instead put him as a decoy. Because like he said, the Germans didn't know when or where the attack was gonna land. What day, what time, and what specific part of the beaches. So they had Patton set up where the Germans probably thought an attack most likely would happen, and he had like a balloon army or something like that. He had fake tanks, fake outposts, fake buildings, made it look like this, it was gonna come from this area, and that was just a distraction. So I'm surprised they didn't actually mention that, or maybe that's just false. I'm pretty sure when reading about Patton that is true, but I'm surprised they didn't bring it up in this. But man, always nice to know the history. I think I got a little emotional just a little bit whenever I see the real photos, and when they're saying, in like the first minutes, thousands were cut down, and they're still pushing forward, like witnessing all that massacre, the death, beaches just covered in blood, can't even see the sand, and you still have the nerve to keep moving forward. Do you go somewhere else in your mind? Is that why when they come home they're a completely changed person? Because you literally war changes you. So like they say, like I said, I can't even fathom how far it changes you, but it changes the person's psyche so much that even when they come home, they're still there in the war. That's why you have people in shock when they come home from wars, and they got to readjust themselves, rehabilitate themselves to society, because the things that they witnessed so much changed them in such a way that they had to become another person. Mentally, they're just, I don't know. But when I see historic figures or historic photos like that of, people dead on the floor and just actual soldiers going forward, like, I'm really glad they had these cinematographers who I think were given awards or medals for doing what they did, recording during all of this. And I remember also watching in another documentary where I think it was one of the surviving soldiers, like a veteran of World War II, and they said even though so many people got medals, he said that every foot that landed on Normandy deserves a medal just for being there. That World War II, that's talked about a lot, especially the landing of Omaha Beach. But I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. I really enjoyed the video. Like I said, tell someone you love them, be good to each other. I'll catch you guys in the next one.